everyone, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our blog, our YouTube channel, and our newsletter, and our great sponsors, Phil Italy, Italy Rooting, and Abitativa Casa. And my guests today are Charlie and Steve Bongiorno. And I kept thinking I'm going to say Bongino, I'm going to say Bon Jovi, but I got it right. So welcome, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Bob. Nice to be here.
So I'm gonna start with Steve because he's closer to Italy than Charlie. So Steve, when did your family arrive into the United States, and when did they come?
Okay.
Where did they settle, I should say?
Yeah, well, my father and mother were born in Stromboli. It's an island, if you don't know, just north of the coast of Messina in Sicily. They were both born in Stromboli. My father was 10 years older than my mother. They lived about 200 yards apart from each other, and their families knew each other, but because of the difference in age, my mother and father were really not friends or anything like that. So you want to know when they came. My came age 16 on April 15th of 1912. That's a date that the Titanic went down. When he arrived at Ellis Island, the immigration station in New York, in the morning, he learned that the Titanic had gone down the night before. So he was probably on his way to New York while the Titanic was sinking in the North Atlantic. So that's when he arrived, okay, at age 16. My father arrived, and
Was he alone, Dad, or did he come with his brothers?
no, he was my father was one of 9 children, 5 brothers and 4 sisters. My father was the youngest of the brothers. All of his brothers had already immigrated to New York ahead of him, okay? And they all remained except one brother who went back to Italy to get married and stayed in Italy, okay? Now, so 5 years later, while my father was here working with his brothers in the fruit and vegetable business, he declared his intention to become a U.S. citizen, which meant that he had to renounce his allegiance to the then King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel. 3 years later, he became, in 1920, he became a naturalized U.S. citizen.
By the way, Dad, let me interrupt you just for a second. The fact that Grandpa became a naturalized U.S. citizen, renouncing his Italian citizenship, prohibits me from requesting Italian citizenship by bloodline. So, you know, I mean, I've lived in Italy long enough to request Italian citizenship, but I could have gotten it automatically through bloodline because all of my grandparents were Italian citizens, you know. But the fact that Grandma and Grandpa, the paternal grandfather became naturalized, renouncing his Italian citizenship, he was no longer considered an Italian citizen from there on in. So, you know, because I got some information on that years ago, and that's what they told me, just as an aside.
Let's
not get into politics.
They actually changed it again because technically I was eligible under my father until just recently, until that last change, because my father was born while my grandfather was still an Italian citizen. He naturalized when my father was 16, and at one point in time that was good. Now it's not. I'm still eligible through my mother, but they keep raising the prices. They keep making it harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, well, that's interesting. So as soon as he became a U.S. naturalized in April of 1920, he then went back to Stromboli to visit his mother, who was ill, but wasn't on her deathbed because she died 5 years later, okay, in Stromboli. passport. Okay. So that was my father. Now, my mother, she was born in Stromboli, as I mentioned, and she came here at age 21. She married my father, who had been here for several years. They moved to Mount Vernon, where I was born, in a home, which was not unusual at that time. And they lived there for about 60 years. Then, when my father died in 1986 at age 91, my mother moved to California to be near her daughter and grandchildren. And there she happily spent the last 13 years of her life. And that's where the flame of the candle that was her life went out. When she died, it's kind of an interesting point, and maybe not so unusual, but in Stromboli, there was a tradition or a custom that whenever a native of Stromboli died anywhere in the world and news reached Stromboli about that death, they would sound the church bells. And of course, people there would wonder who died sounding the bells for. And it just reminded me of John Donne's immortal words about 400 years ago that said, "Never send to know for whom the bells toll. It tolls for thee."
That's pretty bleak, Dad.
Well, that's really interesting that custom that they do that, because they may do it other places, but I never heard that before. So now they were from the same town. Was when your mother came to, well, how did they meet here? Was it arranged by any chance, or did they know
Oh,
people, have acquaintances?
yeah. Well, on the trip when my father went back to visit his mother, he met my mother. Then she came over later on. But people in those days, or at least from uh, you know small areas in Italy, when they got here, everybody lived in the same community. I grew up in a community predominantly Italians, and they were Jewish people there too. So they knew each other, and I don't think it was arranged, but you married somebody that you knew, and that's the way it worked out. After they married, 2 years after that, in 1929, I was born, and grew up. My first language was Sicilian, and in fact, even Strombolian, because that differed a little bit from even the Sicilian language. But I met the children of people that had been there earlier, and they spoke English, and that's how I learned it. And then I learned it in school and so forth. I
So when you went to school, you didn't speak English. And the reason I asked is I just interviewed Dr. Bonjouro, who won a Nobel Prize, I'm sorry, in medicine. Neither one of his parents ever went to any school at all, and he spoke only Italian when he first went to school.
Wow. It's really against the odds, isn't it?
Yes.
To become a Nobel Prize winner.
No, by the time I started kindergarten, I could speak English. In the house, we spoke the dialect for the most part. And then eventually we spoke English in the house because my father was, in contact with the customers that spoke English. Little by little, my mother learned it, and so it turned out that way. But I was always interested in the language, and when I went to college, I studied it, and uh, the grammar was a tough part, and I took 3 years of Italian. Most of it was Italian literature, Dante Alighieri and so forth.
Excuse me just a second. What maybe you didn't even realize it, but I remember as a child when we would go to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and particularly when you spoke with them on the phone from our house, you would speak with your parents in English and Sicilian dialect within the same sentence.
Really?
Yeah, within the same sentence, you were using some English words, some Sicilian dialect words, and Steve and my brother and my sister, we were looking at each other like, what language are they speaking? It's like you could understand some of the words, but what's the rest of that going on?
You're absolutely,
With your mother, particularly with grandma, you did
well,
that.
because she
Yeah.
didn't, she
She
wasn't,
knew English. Yeah, she wasn't as proficient in English.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say it because I remember the exact same thing. Especially my mother, her family, because we were there all the time. But my aunts and my mother, they would drift back and forth from Italian to English, like you said, in the same sentence. My father, basically, he always pretty much spoke to his mother in Italian. I remember him just speaking Italian to her, and I had no idea what they were talking about.
Well, let's jump forward a little bit. I went to college and during the Korean War. By the time I graduated, the Korean War had ended, but they were still sending soldiers to. Graduated in 1953 in May or June or sometime, and by October of 53, just months later, I was drafted, into the Army. And many there were two people that didn't go to further tank training within the U.S. One was a German national who was in the U.S. Army and would become a citizen afterwards. And me, they had me pegged for an interpreter, which I was really not, with the Sicilian background that I had, that wasn't so good. But anyway, based on that, they sent me to Livorno, which is on the west coast of Italy. And I got there after a 14-day trip on a ship from New York to Livorno by way of Casablanca and the Straits of Gibraltar. It was an adventure for me, to tell you the truth. But when I got there, they said, there's one thing we don't need over here, and that's Italian interpreters. And the camp there in Livorno was a supply depot for forces in Austria. So they sent me up to Austria, Salzburg, Austria. At that time, Austria was occupied by English, Americans, French, and Russians. Okay, so I got to go there, and because I had already had my accounting degree, I landed a desk job in regimental headquarters in Salzburg, Austria. It was a beautiful town. You felt like you were centuries ago because everything was old and antique, but it was a very upscale town, affluent citizenship there. And many times they resented the fact that they were being occupied where we were, by Americans. But anyway, I was happy to be there. And I had relatives in Sicily. My father's brother that was in the States went back to Italy to get married, and that's where he was, in Sicily, in the Catania area, a town called Acerriale. And in the Christmas of 1954, I got to Salzburg in April 54. I had some time left, and so I decided to go down and meet and visit my family. And I did that, and took a night train from Salzburg, changed at Innsbruck in Austria, and then caught a train that was coming from France that was going down into Italy through the Brenner Pass. So more adventure. Went through the towns of Bologna and Florence and changed trains and by the way, it was, around in Rome, and then from Rome, another train to take you to Sicily across the Straits of Messina. The whole trip took like a day and a half. And I traveled third class, which meant at that time the seats were wooden.
Oh.
Yeah, they were wooden seats. But I was young, and in good shape, and I didn't mind. It was looking forward to more adventure. So I got down to eventually to actually, my uncle had three daughters, all still young, in their 20s, maybe not married. They were all, happy to see me. I was happy to see them. They showed me around the area, Catania, beautiful park there dedicated to an opera composer, Bellini. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Anyway, while I was there, oh yeah, when we went grocery shopping with my uncle, he insisted that I wear my army uniform. He wanted to show me off, to the local residents, and he did that. And then he said, "Well, okay, you're here. Your family all comes from Stromboli. Your aunts and uncles are there. So we're going to go to Stromboli from Sicily." And we did that. We stayed overnight in Messina, I think it was, and took a boat to Stromboli. Well, we got there, and I met my father's oldest sister, Giovannina, her name was, and her husband, who had been the mayor of Stromboli in the past. Um, and so she invited me to dinner and asked me what would I like to have, chicken or rabbit. Well, I never had rabbit, so I said I'll have chicken. So I said very well. They went in the back, killed the chicken, and and that's what we had for dinner that night. Yeah. And so that was good. On the way back to the house that we was staying in, it was the house of another brother of my father who wanted to marry someone in Stromboli that came from a wealthy family. And the father of the bride, the one he wanted to marry, said, "You're not going to marry my daughter until you have a house for him." So he built a house, which I'm not really sure whether he actually lived in the house or whether he went to the States before that. But that's where we stayed, okay, in that house. On the way back.
Excuse me. Legend in Stromboli says that they never lived in the house. He built it. He showed it to his wife's parents. He said, "No, now I have a house. Can I marry your daughter?" And they said, "Okay, you have a house, and so you can marry the daughter." And he married her, and they went to the United States. They never lived in the house.
Then they never lived there.
That's correct. On the way back, it was dark, and the moon wasn't very bright that night. So we were all going back with oil lamps because there was no electricity there at that time. No electricity, no running water. The water came with tanks every so often, and I don't know how they got it to the homes, but the homes just collect the water from the roof, the rainwater, and that drained into wells that they had. So it was very primitive, to say the least. But it was a real change of the way of life.
So did were there cars there? Because I interviewed somebody who left my mom's hometown in 1960, and he said there were two cars in the whole town.
No, there's no cars there.
No car.
There's no cars there. The streets are too narrow. They have now, what are they, what are they called?
Mopeds, little mopeds.
Whatever.
Yeah, mopeds, yeah. No, you just walked around, and you didn't really need a car because the village was small. Maybe I don't know, a couple of hundred people at that time, but everybody was leaving there because you couldn't make a living there. You grew olives and capers and things like that, and so forth. So. Yeah, no. My grandfather, my father's father, I heard he got bits of information. I don't know where I got it, but he at a time had a job on a ship that went back and forth from New York to Italy, taking imports and exports, And while he was in New York one winter, the Hudson River froze over, and the boat wasn't able to leave New York until it thawed. Waiting for it to thaw, the Brooklyn Bridge was being built at that time, so he worked as a laborer on
That's so funny.
the Brooklyn Bridge. Yeah. I
That's
don't know. I
fantastic.
don't know how long. Yeah, but he did. Yeah. So
Carved his initials in there
Yeah, but
somewhere.
so Charlie, I want to ask you now. Have you been to Stromboli?
I have been to Stromboli. Actually, my first visit to Stromboli, I was about the same age as my father was during his first visit to Stromboli, because
Okay.
I did a semester in London, my junior year in college. I did a semester in London, and after the semester, it was the spring semester, and after the semester was over, I decided to take a train from London all the way down to Italy to meet the same relatives that my father's talking about and their children, who were just about my age. I was 20 years old, and they I visited a lot of cities in Italy during that time, and they took me to Stromboli. So that was in 1981, and although there was electricity, I remember this clearly. There was electricity at that time, and running water. When we got to the house, which was my grandfather's house, we couldn't get the generator going to get the electricity. The electricity, you needed it to draw the water up and take a shower. So we would go and we had to take a swim in the salt water and come back to the house, and we would have to drop a bucket into the well, the underground well, pull up freezing cold water, and pour the bucket over your heads. Someone would hold a colander, okay, to sort of simulate a shower, and that's the way we would rinse off from the salt water.
Ah.
You know, and I'm like, this is 1981, and I'm taking a shower. I'm taking a shower with a bucket of cold water.
And that's interesting to say that because one of the guys in the club, Dr. Nick, I call him Dr. Nick Di Guglielmo, he left Italy from a small town, Avellino. Probably he's a little younger than me, so probably around 1960 or something like that. And the exact same thing. He said we had no running water, we had no, and he said when he got here, the Long Branch in New Jersey, he said he was amazed. He said we all had a room, and all of that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
yeah. But plus, Bob, to just to give an idea of how things change over time. That small primitive island with no electricity, no running water, is now a home. A Dolce and Gabbana have a summer home there. Yachts come in during the summer with celebrities, Sting and Robert De Niro and
Robert De
and
Niro.
Naomi Campbell. Yeah, they're regulars
Wow.
at the place. So it's what was pretty.
They don't have the calendar over their head with the.
No, not at all. Giorgio Armani comes down with his
That's
snake
amazing.
yacht. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
And when Charles, his first trip that he just described, going there, when I learned that he was going there, I said to my wife, I'm going to go over and meet him and surprise him. And so I contacted my cousins who knew I was on the way, but Charles didn't know. Okay. So on quick notice, I got a flight to Rome, then to Naples and so forth, took the overnight boat from Naples to Stromboli. It's an overnight trip. And when I got off I don't know, was there a port there at the time? Or
Yeah, there's support.
there was
Yeah, there's support. And one of the big activities in Stromboli is to go and meet the ship when it comes in, or go to meet the ship when it's leaving the island, which happens, twice a week, basically. That's not that often that people have nothing to do, so they go and meet the ship and see who's disembarking that day.
So when I got there,
That's what we did.
with the rest of the family, and it was a big surprise.
That's nice.
Yeah,
That's
because
very-
before they built the port, the first time that I was there, no electricity. People getting off a ship that had to go to Stromboli had to be unloaded from the ship onto rowboats, and the fishermen from would come in the rowboats and take the people to the shore where everybody was waiting for who's coming to Stromboli. Sometimes relatives, and even if they weren't, that was an event, as Charlie here pointed out.
That's amazing. So Charlie, how did you wind up in Italy, living in Italy?
Question. That visit, which was my first time to Italy, I kind of fell in love with the whole place. The food, the traditions, the culture, and the way of life. And Although I was born and raised in New York in an Italian American family, but I'm totally American in terms of how I was raised. Somehow in Italy, I felt a little bit comfortable there,
Mm.
and I enjoyed the challenge of learning the language as well. And so that was my junior year in college. And so when I went back to New York, I finished my degree and looked for a job. I was determined to find a job in an international company where I might have the possibility to be posted overseas. And so I started working in New York for an international insurance broker, an employee benefit consultant. And we had offices in, I think it was like 40 or 50 countries around the world. And after I did a 3-year training program there, which pretty much unknown nowadays to do a 3-year training program. That's when companies used to train.
Yeah, that's when you got training.
When you got trained. And after about 2 years, they were looking for someone in the Milan office, someone young who would be cheap to move, sort of ready to go on. And the directors called me into their office and they asked me if I was interested in the position. It was in the employee benefits area because the markets were growing there for private pensions and private health care and things like that. And I said yes right away. And 2 months later, I was in Milano.
Wow, that's
I was
fantastic.
in,
That's
26
It
years
was,
old.
it was supposed to be there for 3 to 5 years, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I'm
and that
still
turned out to be 35 years.
exactly. I've now spent more years of my life in Italy than I have in the
Oh,
United States.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to work in England for 2 years. Of course, I was much older and married, but they asked me, and I said, if my wife says it's okay, I'm gone. And it is a great experience because I tell people, when you visit Italy, even if you come from here and you're Italian, all of that, you're not immersed in the culture like living in England. After 2 years, you kind of almost feel like you're English, and I'm
Oh,
sure it was
yeah.
the same thing with you.
Well, very comfortable here now. You learn the ropes, you learn the do's and don'ts. And so it took a while. It took a while with foreign Americans sort of used to efficiency and, not too much bureaucracy, at least at the time. It was frustrating, very frustrating at the beginning, trying to get things done. You learn that there's another way to approach things, and another way to approach people, and another way to approach problems.
Yeah, one of the American guys, he took his family there for a year, and he had gone first, and he had to get some paper for his wife. I forget what it was, one of those residency things or something like that. And he said I went to there were two windows. I went to one window, and I asked the guy, and he said, no, 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 you can't have that here. So I said to my wife, well, let's go over to that window and see what he says. He went over to that window. The guy came over.
Yeah, when I first got to Italy, I mean, Italy was uh,
Well, they were still
dire.
they were still recovering from the war, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was poor. It was very, very bad. It's not at all the way Italy is today from my perspective. But turned out good. And so I'm I left the home that raised my family in after being in there for 65 years in Farmingdale, Long Island, and I'm now living in a senior establishment. Not assisted living yet. I'm in pretty good health for my age. Saturday. I'm going to be 96. So
Happy birthday! That's fantastic.
thanks. Yeah, I'm happy about that. But my grandson and his family live in Houston. They're coming up tonight, as a matter of fact. And my daughter, who lives in Maryland, is coming up tomorrow. So we're going to spend my birthday and Easter together for a few days. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Do you get to do anything you want when you're 96?
Yeah, anything you want and anything you're able to do.
Well, you look like you're able to do a lot of stuff.
I'm able to drive, okay, but my children don't think I am, okay, or they may think I am, but they're afraid of what might happen if I continue to drive. So I have a car here, but it's in my view all the time. But I absolutely will not drive unless I get the okay from, I guess, my oldest son. My daughter is absolutely against it. I call.
Dad, we want to see you get to 96 and 97 and 98 after
100 and
that.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, Bob, you may be
Well,
interested. You know, my father. I heard you mention on another occasion that you do a lot of you do a lot of genealogy research, or you did it for your own family and so forth.
oh,
My
yeah.
my father put together. Maybe you might be interested in hearing him talk a little bit about. He put together our family tree for as much as he was able to do so, and maybe
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
the process. You know.
Yeah, well, the information I got was from relatives that I have here that came from Stromboli. The cousins of my cousins that live in Sicily, all three of them. The oldest one, she just passed away at age 97, but we were very close and we had a good relationship. And she helped me with the dates and things like that. And while I was in Stromboli, she took me to the church and she knew the pastor there. And we opened up the record books of ancestors to see what we could find as far as dates of birth and death. Yeah. And my grandfather, we found he was born in 1857. He died in 1911. And, yeah, so I never knew uh, them, of course, and uh, I never knew my other grandfather either. My mother's grandfather, who came from Stromboli. He. When my mother came, she came with a family, but her father had already been here in the U.S. and he used to send money back to Stromboli and so forth. And he'd go back every once in a while, stay, have another child, and then go back to the U.S. He passed away before I knew him, so I never knew my.
How far were you able to go back in time with the family tree to your
Father,
grandparents?
yeah, only my
Okay.
grandfather. Yeah,
Okay.
it wasn't, my cousin Sarah took me to the church, and the church said, what time period are you interested in? And so I wanted to see my grandfather, so they brought out the books and they got information, but
But
he
as
was
far
in
as
a hurry. He
as far
said, "Are
as
you done yet?" and so forth. So it was kind
yeah,
of a rush job, And I'm not sure I would be able to tell him much about who I was looking for. I know that my grandfather, he was the first Stephen. His father was a Giuseppe. So my father's oldest brother, Uncle Joe, was named Giuseppe. And after five, they said, "Okay, we'll name my father after his father." And so now I'm the third. My son, who just walked in, is the fourth. He had twins. One of them was named Stephen, but he passed away shortly after birth. He would have been the fifth. So we have a. But now the other twin that survived lives in Houston right now, and they named him Jeremy Bongiorno. So we'll see what happens.
so
Yeah, no. Their son is my son's
but
Child.
as far as you know, your family's been on that island for
my parent. I call it Stromboli. Okay, people here, my neighbors, they call it Stromboli. I said Stromboli is a sandwich. I says Stromboli is an island, a volcanic island, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah, and what was I getting at?
know that your family's been there for
Yeah. Oh,
right.
yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, when we in the house, when my parents referred to Stromboli between them, they call it Strognoli. Strognoli. Yeah. And in English, it would be like Strong Island. And I looked that up, the history of it and so forth. I really forget the details of it, but we always said Stromboli, and people that were born there, when they referred to it, they never called it Stromboli.
Yeah, they call it Stromboli. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
because at one time it was called Isle, but in Italian. Yeah, it's kind of not clear to me. I know that they were dinner when all the families got together. They talk about Stromboli. Yeah. So as far back as I know, they
They all been on that island. That
yeah.
would be something to be able to go to find out.
Yeah,
back.
yeah. I was, I was,
And it depends on the parish priest. Some of them are very open and forthcoming and
yeah,
let you in, and some of them are like some of them don't even let you in. My mom's hometown, he doesn't even let anybody in.
yeah.
And so
Well, this guy, because of my cousin, if I had gone myself,
yeah, you would have got it. Yeah.
so he said okay, but he was in a rush. He kept looking over my shoulder. Yeah, you got what you want, and so it wasn't a good time to tell him to go back and take another book with the previous generation. So
Yeah.
that could be.
I heard one story. I forget who it was told me this story, but they they I think it was a guy and his brother or cousin. The priest got one of the family members pregnant, and they beat him to death, and they left and came to America.
Oh my God.
Isn't that some story? That's
Yes.
I heard a story yesterday from a friend of mine who told me something similar. In their family, there was a priest going back a few generations, a priest who fell in love with a woman and left the priesthood and got married. And when he left the priesthood, he had to they took away his family name from him.
really.
So their children are have their family name is Esposito. Is a typical family name given to orphans.
My father's father was in the seminary. He was studying to be a priest. Wasn't a priest yet. He was studying to be a priest, and we heard the story growing up that he used to say that my grandmother would come and flirt with him by the window. But then I found out from one of my cousins that the real story was my grandmother they had money, and her carriage broke down in front of the seminary, and he was out there and he helped them fix whatever needed to be fixed, and they gave him a ride, and that was the end of that. I'm lucky to be here, I guess, is the moral of that story.
Well, Bob, how did you get way? So you were able to go way back into your family history, right? How did you do that?
Well, my grandmother came from two noble families. My father's
Okay.
and so it was all documented. Once I made the connection, it's all
there.
Libradoro, all the families. My great grandmother, and I had never heard this name. She was a Caracciolo. So if you're ever in Naples, I mean, they were all over.
Caracciolo.
And so
I think Gianni Agnelli married a Caracciolo. His wife's name was a maiden name.
she might be a cousin of sorts. There's a million of them. They're all over the place because it's a huge family.
It was a noble family.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And there were three branches. I'm from the Rosso, and then there's two others. I don't remember what the other two was. But when I first looked up my grandfather, because I knew he was from a noble family, he was Pirmalo. When I first put him in, Googled him, this record came up from the Libro d'Oro, and it showed him being married to this Emilia Caracciolo. So it made sense. His name was Nicola. My father was Nicholas. My godmother was Amelia. So all the names matched up, the dates matched up, everything matched up. And so I asked my cousin, Louise, who lived with my grandmother, I said, "Did you ever know this Quatchlo?" She says, "Oh yeah, that was Nanny's mother's name." And I said, "Do you know how famous? Do you know who these people are?" I said, "They're like one of the most famous families in southern Italy."
There's a main street in Naples via Calaccio.
Yeah.
Along the seashore. Yeah.
And so through the Libro d'Oro, I could trace back to the first Caracciolo in Naples to 950 AD. That's how far that family goes back.
950
AD. Yeah.
Wow.
And when we were in Naples, they took us to the archives. They pulled out, so it was like a deed or something from the King of France, I think it was, from like 1100, naming one of the Caracciolo's as whatever he was, whatever titles they bestowed
some
on
kind of
him,
title.
whatever. But my eighth great grandfather owned much of current day Campania.
Really?
My eighth and ninth great grandfather were the princes of Avellino, and they were.
Okay.
I mean, their wealth was beyond comprehension. But of course, things get watered down. The family's so big, and then you had naturally you had the unification, and that changed a lot of things. But yeah, it was an interest. I had no idea that I was ever going to find anything. And my mother's family were farmers from Torito in Bari. So
Fascinating.
had they, the families had not come here, be a whole different story. Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time, and
It's an
this is
experience for me. Yeah,
fantastic.
very good.
So
Very good.
Thanks very